Think about the last time money made you feel something. Not the transaction. The feeling. The tightness when a bill arrives on the wrong day. The quiet exhale when something breaks and you can actually cover it. The strange hollow feeling when you finally reach a number you thought would change everything. And somehow life still feels ordinary. Money does not just change your lifestyle. It changes what you worry about at 2 a.m. It changes which conversations feel safe to have. It changes who you spend time with. And it changes what version of yourself you are allowed to be. Today, I want to walk through what money actually feels like at different income levels. Not the bank balance, the real emotional experience of each stage. Because understanding where you are right now is the first step to moving forward with more intention. This is not about judging any level. It is about understanding what is actually happening inside you at each one. And some of what I am going to say might be uncomfortable. But uncomfortable is where clarity starts. The first stage is what most people in survival mode experience. In Australia, this looks like earning somewhere around $30,000 to $40,000 a year. For some, this is a first job, a part-time role, a period between things. At this level, money does not feel like a resource. It feels like a countdown. Every week starts with a mental calculation. Rent, food, transport, phone. What is left? Will it cover everything until next pay? The emotional experience here is not stress in the dramatic sense. It is a low, constant hum of calculation that never fully turns off. You make decisions in a specific order. Not what do I want, but what can I not skip? And here is the psychological trap that most people do not talk about. When every decision is about survival, your brain slowly stops making long-term plans. Not because you are not intelligent, but because the brain conserves energy by focusing on what is immediate. Planning 5 years ahead starts to feel like a luxury you cannot mentally afford. The weight of this level is not just financial. It is the quiet erosion of your ability to imagine a different future. The next stage brings relief, but it is fragile. Around $50,000 to $60,000 a year, something shifts. The constant hum gets quieter. You stop holding your breath between paydays. You can say yes to something small without immediately running the numbers in your head. This is what psychologists describe as the transition out of scarcity thinking. At this level, you start thinking beyond the next 2 weeks. But here is the reality. One unexpected event can still bring the old anxiety rushing back. A car problem. A rent increase that hits earlier than expected. A dentist visit you kept putting off. A week off work. You are stable, but you are not yet safe. And that difference matters more than most people realize. The emotional work at this level is about building a real buffer. Not because you are being paranoid, but because the distance between stable and desperate is still uncomfortably short. Here is where it gets psychologically interesting. Around $70,000 to $85,000 a year, most people would describe their life as fine. You pay your bills. You have some savings. You go on a decent holiday once a year. You cannot complain. But inside, something uncomfortable starts happening. You become acutely aware of the gap. The gap between where you are and where you expected to be. The house you cannot quite afford yet. The career progression that feels slower than expected. The friends who appear to be further along, at least from the outside. This is the level where social comparison becomes loudest. Not because your life is bad, but because you now have enough stability to look up instead of just surviving. And looking up at the wrong things is expensive. People at this level often make costly decisions to close a gap that exists mostly in their head. A car upgrade that did not need to happen yet. A suburb that stretched the budget because the postcode felt like proof of progress. Spending to feel like they are ahead when financially they are moving backwards. This is the level where lifestyle inflation does the most silent damage. Because there is just enough income to absorb expensive mistakes without immediately feeling them. Around $100,000 to $110,000 a year, something interesting happens. In Australia, this is roughly the point where most people move into the top 20% of income earners. And yet, the most common reaction when people cross this number is not relief. It is this: I thought this would feel different. The money is good. The bills are handled. There is capacity to save. But the feeling of having arrived, of having finally made it, often does not come. What replaces it is a quieter, more complex pressure. Expectations from yourself and from others quietly increase. You feel like you should be further ahead. You stop comparing yourself to where you were and start comparing yourself to where someone at this income is supposed to be. Something else shifts here too. You stop talking about money openly. not because you are arrogant, but because you have learned, often from direct experience, that the number changes how people treat you. You learn to keep it to yourself. And this is the first level where money begins to create a specific kind of loneliness. The shift around $150,000 to $180,000 is less about things and more about time. At this income, you stop measuring your week in transactions and start measuring it in choices. Can I leave this job if I needed to? Can I take 2 weeks off without mentally calculating what it costs me? Can I say no to something uncomfortable without a financial consequence following? This is what financial psychologists call the beginning of real freedom. Not freedom from work, freedom within work. But here is something most people do not expect. By the time most people reach this level, they have already adapted to the lifestyle. The mortgage, the car payments, the private school fees, the obligations that accumulated as the income grew. The income now feels necessary to maintain the life, not excess that creates freedom. So the emotional experience is often not relief. It is a higher altitude version of the same budget management. At a larger scale with larger consequences. At incomes above $200,000 to $250,000, something social starts happening that is hard to explain unless you have experienced it. Your conversations change, not because you become a different person, but because the things that occupy your attention shift. Tax structures, investment portfolios, asset protection, business decisions. And slowly, the number of people around you who share these concerns shrinks. There is a specific kind of isolation that arrives at higher income levels. Not because people dislike you, but because fewer people understand the particular financial pressure you now carry. You cannot discuss a renovation without it reading as bragging. You cannot talk about a business problem without it seeming like a foreign language to most people around you. The emotional experience at this level is one of altitude. Higher up the view is better, but the air is thinner. And when you look down, you realize how far you have come from the person who was calculating whether they could afford an extra grocery item. That distance is real. And for many people at this level, it creates a quiet grief. A grief for a simpler version of themselves. A version that felt part of something ordinary. Here is what ties all of this together. Every income level has its own version of financial stress. Every income level has its own version of psychological pressure. And every income level has something it is protecting and something it is chasing. At $30,000, you are protecting survival. At $70,000, you are protecting the appearance of progress. At $120,000, you are protecting your identity. At $180,000, you are protecting freedom. And above $250,000, you are often protecting a version of your life that has become expensive to maintain. The mistake most people make is believing the next level will finally feel like enough. It rarely does, not automatically, because the income changes. But the internal relationship with money, the anxiety, the comparison, the need to prove something does not update on its own. That is why understanding money is not just about the numbers. It is about understanding what you are actually asking money to do for you. Are you asking it to make you feel safe? To prove something to someone? To buy the version of yourself you have been quietly picturing? To give you the options your current life does not have? Understanding the answer to that question matters more than the balance in your account. Because money cannot answer a question it was never designed to answer. What it can do is give you options. Options to make choices from strength rather than from fear. Options to build a life you actually designed. Options to leave situations that drain you. Options to stay in places that matter to you. And that does not start at a specific number. It starts with a decision. The decision to understand what money is actually doing in your life. And what you actually want it to do. This video is for general education only and is not personal financial advice. Here on Ontim Finance, we explain money in simple words so normal people can make better decisions. If any of these income levels resonated with where you are right now, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this helped you think differently, subscribe to Ontim Finance, because this is exactly the kind of conversation we have here.